Hi, my name is Irena Swanson and today I want to show you how to make these square and square blocks of finished size 4 inches. On the board you see 5 different colors and the board fits only 5 blocks of each kind, but there are 7 additional of each color. So for 12 total of each color. I made these 5 times 12, so 60 blocks with only 22 seams total, which is amazing. With traditional methods, each one of these blocks would take 4 seams, and you would probably make it a little bigger and then trim it down. So this would be 240 seams total for the 60 blocks, and you would have to do some trimming down. And with my method, two-piecing method, I can make this with only 22 seams, which is amazing. You can make either 5 by 12 or maybe 4 by 12 blocks. I'll show you later why 4 or 5. You can see more about these 1 by 1 blocks in the last chapter of my book, Streamlining in Quilting. The last chapter is all about making these blocks, not just by 1 blocks, but also 3 by 2, 5 by 7, whatever. So for example, here I can make with my fast method this 3 by 1 block without the unnecessary seams here, or I can make 3 by 2 block again without unnecessary seams here. So I will show at the end of this video other possibilities for these blocks, but you may want to go check out my books. I have 3 books on Amazon, all about two-piecing, a very streamlined way of making quilts. Alright, so let's get started. We start with strips. Everything starts from strips. I cut my strips from selvage to selvage. And if this is a block, well, I happen to have several 4.5-inch templates. This one is from paper, this one is from plastic, and I also mark notches where the squares are supposed to be. I also have a 4.5-inch ruler, but it's very handy to have, but it's not necessary. So this is supposed to be finished size 4 inches. So this diagonal in the inner square is supposed to be 4 inches, which means that this length here, the side length of the square, is 4 divided by square root of 2 inches, and then we have to add strip allowance, seam allowance. So you cut the strips for the inner squares at strip width 3 and 5/16 of an inch. 5/16 is between 4/16, which is a quarter, and 6/16, which is 3/8. So you cut in between there. Usually there are no notches on the ruler between 1/8 of an inch, but just cut halfway in between. So either you cut 5 strips or maybe just 4 strips for the inner squares, all from selvage to selvage, at strip width 3 and 5/16 of an inch. Now for the corners of these blocks, you want all fabrics, either 5 strips or 4 strips, you want them all from the same fabric so that you don't have mishmash around the different blocks, if you don't want that. The minimum width of the strips for the corners is 5 3/4 of an inch, and you do that only if you're a very accurate sewer and if you know this method already. For everybody else, you may want to start with 6.5-inch, possibly even 6 3/4 of an inch wide. So, all right. So here is my strip set. So I cut 5 of the inner square strips and then 5 of the outer corner strips. Okay. So I sew these so that the strips are pretty much aligned here near the top, but at the bottom, well, some of my strips were cut from some previous projects, so they were longer than others. but the tops should be about even. So here I can also explain why 5 versus 4. We will create tubes, and tubes are comfortable to work with if they're not too wide or if they're not too narrow. And 5 or 4 is the most comfortable. Once you sew all the strips together, then you want to press. You press all seams either all to one side or all toward the dark fabrics, it's up to you. And once it's all pressed, then you want to trim the top as much as possible, as close as possible to the top. And once all the cut has to be perpendicular to all the seams. And then you take this top and you sew the two outer strips together. Okay, so you sew them together and what you get is a tube. Okay, so I will show you a tube. This really is a tube. Here it opens up. And you want to press the latest seam as well. So pressing on a tube is a little harder, but this is wide enough circumference of the tube, so it's okay. And then the next thing you want to do is we will want to cut across into narrow tubes. But first you probably want to trim off, square off the top again, even though it's supposedly already squared off, but you might just want to square it off again. And then you cut this wide tube into narrow tubes. And the width of these narrow tubes is the same as the strip width of all the square strips. So this width is 3 5/16 of an inch. And if you cut your strips from selvage to selvage, you should get 12 of these narrow tubes. There's 7 of them there, 1 here, and then there are 4 of them here stacked up. And then, of course, you will get some leftovers, and I trust that you have a way of using them. Why do I use tubes? So what's tube piecing all about? If this is just a strip, piece strip, then you either sew it like this or you sew it like that. There are no other options. But with tubes, you have options. And then we will want to sew these tubes together, and we will start to see how do we sew these together. And colors really don't matter in this project. So we want to sew these together so that these blocks don't interfere with each other. So it's important that you space out these inner squares appropriately. So before we do the next tube strips, we have to tube piecing. We have to prepare our tubes for that. So here are already 4 of these narrow tubes lined up. There are 4. So when I stack them, so the bottom one exposes a bit, about a seam allowance or possibly a little less. And then important thing is that these square fabrics line up. Color doesn't matter. It's just that this seam, this seam, this seam, this seam, they all line up. And then I take my ruler. I brought a long ruler. And if your wide strip width was only 5 3/4 of an inch, then you will want to go measure down 3/4 of an inch and mark in the margin 3/4 of an inch. So mark it here, mark it there. If your strip width for the corner fabrics is 6 1/2 inches or more, then you want to mark down 1 inch and 1/16 of an inch. So just between 1 inch and 1 1/8 of an inch in there, and you mark here, and you mark here. So this marks just this one side, but then so possibly it did this, and then you want to turn your tube around and with tubes, and you do the marking on this side, well, maybe this way, And you can do this marking just one at a time, or maybe you want to stack all of these. So maybe I'll take this one and put it on top, and the next one put it on top. So if the marks are on this side here, then they should be on this side, not on that side. They all should be on the same side. And so then you mark also here either 3/4 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch, 3/4 or 1/16, but be consistent. It's the same throughout, depending on the width of your corner fabrics. Once these are marked, then what you do when you sew these together, so again, all the markings are on this side. Make sure don't accidentally flip it the other way so the marks are on this side. All the marks should be here. But when you sew it together, then of course the top strip, the top tube has to be flipped over. So the marks on this one are, well, are on the other side, but still on this side. But here I take this bottom of the square block here, square here, and top of the square here. I line up this seam with the notch I made on the bottom. So I take one layer of each of the tubes, I line up at the notches, and then at the next notches, and I just, so I don't have to pin ahead of time, just I go to the sewing machine, sew to here, then line up the next notch here, and sew, and so on. So in this way, you sew all the 12 narrow tubes together, so that will be 12, that will be 11 seams. And then you get these wide tubes. So here I have two examples. In this one, the strip width on the corner fabrics is generous, so this is 1/16 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch. No, not here. This one is 1/16 of an inch. And over here, these corner fabrics are narrower, so these here are 3/4 of an inch. But now you can start to see the blocks. All right, so here, there's one of the blocks. There's a neighbor block. There's another neighbor block. And you can start cutting them out. Right? And the same for the other one. Now the advantage of these wide strips, the way I used wide strips, instead of doing these cuts across that I have to do in the other, on this one instead, what I can do is inside one of these, not the 1/16 of an inch, but the other, the wider holes, along one of these diagonals, I mark center points, and then I cut. I cut with scissors one layer of the tube only, and when I cut it out, I get a flat piece. One more. So I get a flat piece. And so once you have a flat piece, it's easy to press. And on this large one, you can also cut along the other diagonals. And then from these columns, you can cut out the blocks. Here, and there, and there. Okay. But what happens at the corners, well, notice that I did not cut this all the way across. I left it open. This corner square has something missing, and what's missing is on the other side of this. It's on the other side of this. So I'll have to sew the two outer edges. This used to be a primary narrow tube, and there's the other end too. I'll sew them together. Let me explain it on the other way, example where it's narrow, where we have to do much more care. So here I cannot cut along the diagonal. I will have to cut across, and again this is a double layer, so I shouldn't cut all the way through. I want to cut it in some way, possibly here, go like that, go here. So maybe I don't have to cut out the blocks, but I do want to do some zigzag cutting and until I get all the way to the other side, then I can open it up and press everything. This is not yet pressed, so by cutting things out, well, you may want to smooth out the non-pressed parts first, or what you do is you press this tube just inside or outside just so much that it's flat pressed where you're going to do the cut. There's just one more care you have to do. So if I cut across in this way, so here on the out, if I cut here, I don't have to cut down the bottom. If I cut here, so this is above a block, above a square, so then on the other side, I will have to cut below a square. So here it's above, here it's below, so that it eventually, when I will sew this part to that part, when everything is flat, then the two edges will match together perfectly. So in any case, we will do some kind of zigzag cutting across. Make sure that when you do the cuts, you don't interfere with each other, with neighboring blocks. So you cut across, and what you get is here, and then I pressed. So here you can see the top part pressed, and then the bottom image cut out as well. All right, so this is the mirror image cut out, and now what we can do is we can start cutting out the rest of the blocks. All right, so we could cut out, but even here, this used to be part of a primary narrow tube, and here's also one. So here at the edges, we still have a problem. I need to sew that to the other end. So again, what we do is, here's a trick. I don't want to sew this edge to that edge. I'll again have a tube. So before I may do that, I will now cut these blocks. I don't have to cut full blocks, but just another zigzag across. Then I'll have two parts, like here. So here's again the X tube, and the same as at the bottom, and I cut across. I did cut a few of the blocks out, but some of them are incomplete. And once this is complete, then I got this off. So now I can take this flat edge and sew it to the other edge, and you sew it. There are marks over here where I will do the sewing. And once you sew this, here is the final very jagged rectangle with some of the blocks already cut out. Well, so that's it. Then you get a lot of these, 60 or 48 of these blocks at the same time with only 22 seams. For 48 you actually need only 20 seams. All right, I hope you enjoy that. What I had behind me, this is also a 1x1 block. This is a smaller 1x1 block, and according to the terminology in the last chapter of my book here on streamlining, this is also a 1x1 block. It doesn't have to be a square. And then for bonus part, I will show you what else I can do with that. The advantage of two-piecing is that, well, when I I use full strips, then I may have more parts than what I actually need for the final quilt. So here I had more parts, and so with just a few seams, this was put together around all the blocks. Here is another example with these 4-inch 1x1 blocks. Isn't this beautiful? And then I want to show you, just like in my book, and I already explained before, it's not just 1x1. You could also have 2x2 and so on. And also the angles don't have to be right angles. So these angles inside do happen to be right angles, but the outside ones are not. This is 2x1 without a seam here. This is 3x1 without the seam inside. These blocks here are 3x2, again not right angles. There are 18 pieces on each one of them, so with traditional methods this would take 17 seams. I sewed all 11 of these blocks together with fewer than 30 seams. This here is a 5x2. This is 4x2, and you can see another 3x3 and another 2x3 or 3x2 depending on how you orient them. And here's the traditional grandmother's square, which is in this nomenclature is 3x3. I love making these blocks. I like trying my method and how I can make various things fast. Here's another grandmother square. So these are all P by Q blocks. P and Q are whole numbers. But in all of these that I've shown so far, there are no seams going into the corners. No seams. Okay. But here I can also make P by Q blocks where seams do go into the corners. And I call this split P by Q. So this happens to be 1, 2, 3 by 1, 2, 3. So this is a split 3x3. Very different from the traditional grandmother's 3x3. Here is another split block. This is 1x1. Traditionally, these blocks are also called broken dishes blocks. But I didn't make these as individual blocks. I used chapter 8, not the last chapter, penultimate chapter in here, to make these even more efficiently. So these are split P by Q blocks, or P and Q are whole numbers, but P and Q can also be half numbers. So this is 4 by a half. So these are not whole parallelograms in either way. Some of the blocks are rotated. Here's another traditional block, flying geese. Flying goose block is 1 by a half, but I made these flights of flying geese not one at a time, but I have a more efficient method for making these, again in chapter 8. And a very common a lot by a half is pattern is half square triangles, or actually rows of any triangles are many by a half. Here is another example of rows of triangles, so many by a half. Rows here are actually along these rows. Do you see them? And here's one row, and then it's flipped row. Okay. And then finally, with rows of triangles, you can also make all over patterns like these pyramids pattern. Okay. I hope that you enjoyed this display of 1x1 blocks and many by many blocks, and look at my book for more patterns and different angles. Thank you for watching.
5.